June 10, 2001. Night drapes over the high-security compound at Terre Haute, Indiana. In one sterile corner of the penitentiary, a single fluorescent light burns through the hush, throwing hard edges on cement walls and metal bars. Timothy McVeigh, at 33, is just hours away from being the first person executed by the federal government in nearly 4 decades. Yet, if anyone expected signs of regret or fear, they would not find them here. Instead, McVeigh leans back in his cell, eyes locked on a silent television screen tuned to the news, almost content, almost distant, a faint smile pulling across his lips as if watching a program only he understands. Let me know if you approve this break or want adjustments before I continue with the next section of the introduction. For most death row inmates, these would be hours swallowed by prayer, tears, or paralyzing dread. But McVeigh sits remarkably calm. Some guards even note him laughing softly at something on screen. It's surreal, almost impossible to reconcile. A man who killed 168 people, including 19 children, behaving as if these final moments hold no weight at all. No Bible rests by his side, no family surrounds him, just the dull flicker of cable news casting cold light across his face. Outside, survivors of the Oklahoma City bombing wait for word. Families who've spent 6 years trapped between grief and rage, children orphaned, bodies still buried. A nation that's been holding its breath for justice. Yet inside this concrete tomb, Timothy McVeigh seems unconcerned with any of it. How does a decorated war hero, a soldier who once proudly served his country, become America's most notorious domestic terrorist? What kind of transformation leads a man to park a truck bomb in front of a federal building and walk away while innocent lives are torn apart? And when you know exactly when and how you're going to die, what thoughts fill those final hours? Does guilt creep in? Does fear? Or do you sit there, defiant to the bitter end, convinced you were right all along? This is the story of Timothy McVeigh's final hours. But to understand that chilling last night, you first have to understand the path that led him there, a path paved with anger, ideology, and a choice that would leave a permanent scar on American history. Timothy James McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York, a blue-collar town where American flags hung from porches and most folks worked honest, hard jobs. He grew up in nearby Pendleton with his father, Bill, who worked at a radiator plant, after his parents divorced when McVeigh was just 10 years old. His mother left, taking his 2 sisters with her, leaving young Timothy raised primarily by his dad in a quiet, working-class household. By most accounts, McVeigh was a shy, withdrawn kid, the kind who got bullied at school and retreated into his own world. He found solace in guns, learning to shoot with his grandfather during weekend target practice sessions. That early fascination would grow into something much deeper, an obsession with firearms, survivalism, and eventually anti-government ideology fueled by books like the Turner Diaries, a violent, dystopian novel about overthrowing the federal government. In May 1988, at 20 years old, McVeigh enlisted in the U.S. Army. For a while, it seemed like the military might give him purpose. He excelled as a soldier, serving with distinction during the Persian Gulf War as a decorated sergeant in the 11th Infantry. Fellow soldiers respected him. He was disciplined, skilled, and proud to wear the uniform. But something shifted after he left the Army. A bitterness set in, a growing resentment toward the very government he'd once served. 2 events became flashpoints for McVeigh's transformation. First, the 1992 standoff at Ruby Ridge, where federal agents killed a man's wife and son during a botched arrest. Then came Waco in 1993, the siege that ended with the compound burning to the ground, killing more than 70 people, including children. McVeigh saw these incidents not as tragedies but as proof of government tyranny, He began to believe that armed resistance wasn't just justified, it was necessary. McVeigh wasn't just angry, he was calculated. He read extremist literature, attended gun shows, and quietly began to surround himself with people who shared his anti-government views. Men like Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier, fellow Army buddies who understood his rage. He quit the National Rifle Association, calling them too soft on gun rights. He isolated himself, moving into an apartment with no phone, cutting ties with anyone who might question his growing radicalism. But believing in something and acting on it are two very different things, and what McVeigh did next would change America forever. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever wondered how someone goes from serving their country to destroying innocent lives? What do you think pushes a person over that edge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this story as haunting as I do, hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow. In September 1994, McVeigh began turning his rage into action. He recruited Terry Nichols, a fellow Army veteran he'd known since basic training, and the two started gathering materials at a lakeside campground near McVeigh's old post. Fertilizer, fuel. 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate mixed with nitromethane, a volatile racing fuel, creating what's known as ANFO, a homemade explosive powerful enough to level buildings. Michael Fortier, another Army buddy, knew about the plan but chose to stay on the sidelines, later testifying that McVeigh told him exactly what he intended to do and when. McVeigh wasn't random in his selection. He chose the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City for three calculated reasons. It was accessible, the layout offered perfect camera angles for maximum media coverage, and it housed multiple federal agencies, the very symbols of the government he despised. But timing mattered most. April 19, 1995, marked the 2-year anniversary of the Waco siege, the event that had consumed him with fury. This wasn't just an attack, it was a statement. The morning of April 19th arrived like any other Wednesday in Oklahoma City. Parents dropped their children off at the daycare center on the second floor of the Murrah building. Federal employees filed into offices. Coffee brewed. Phones rang. At approximately 9 a.m., McVeigh parked a rented yellow Ryder truck at the north entrance of the building, directly beneath the daycare. He lit 2 fuses, locked the doors, and walked away toward a nearby YMCA. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the world exploded. The blast tore through 9 floors, ripping off the entire front facade of the building and creating a crater 5 feet deep and 30 feet wide. Windows shattered half a mile away. The sound echoed 55 miles across the Oklahoma plains. Inside, chaos became unspeakable. 168 people were killed instantly or died shortly after, including 19 children in that daycare center, some too young to even speak their own names. More than 680 others were injured, many critically. The blast destroyed or damaged over 300 buildings across a 16-block radius. The human toll extended far beyond the body count. 219 children lost at least one parent that morning. 30 children were completely orphaned, left without a mother or father in a single, senseless moment. 462 people lost their homes. 7,000 lost their workplaces. Rescue workers pulled bodies from twisted steel and concrete for 17 days. Parents stood behind police tape, desperately waiting for news about their babies. America had never seen domestic terrorism on this scale. The nation froze, grief-stricken and terrified. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. McVeigh's capture wasn't the result of sophisticated FBI work or high-tech surveillance. It was sheer, dumb luck. Approximately 90 minutes after the bombing, at 10:20 a.m., Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger was patrolling Interstate 35 near Perry about 60 miles north of Oklahoma City, when he noticed a yellow Mercury Marquis driving without a license plate. Just a routine traffic violation. Nothing more. Hanger pulled the car over, approached the driver's window, and asked for identification. That's when he noticed something beneath the man's jacket. A loaded .45 caliber Glock pistol with black Talon ammunition. The man responsible for the worst terrorist attack on American soil was pulled over for a missing license plate. Think about that for a second. If that trooper hadn't been paying attention, if McVeigh had just put a license plate on his car, he might have gotten away. It makes you realize how thin the line is between justice and tragedy. If this story is making you think, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. We're going deep into cases like this every week. Less than 2 hours after the Oklahoma City bombing, while chaos and rescue operations swallowed the city, Timothy McVeigh was behind the wheel of a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis, driving north on Interstate 35. His plan was almost flawless. But one detail stood out. He hadn't put a license plate on the car. State Trooper Charlie Hanger noticed immediately. What was supposed to be a simple traffic stop would alter the course of the investigation forever. Hanger pulled McVeigh over. As he approached the car, he spotted a bulge beneath McVeigh's windbreaker, a .45 caliber Glock loaded with black Talon ammunition, notorious for its heavy stopping power. McVeigh was calm, didn't resist, and gave his Michigan address, an address linked to the Nichols family. Hanger arrested him on weapons charges and for not having vehicle registration. At the Noble County Jail, McVeigh found himself in limbo. He should have posted bond and walked free, but fate intervened. The local judge was unexpectedly unavailable due to a family matter, forcing McVeigh to remain in custody just long enough for the larger investigation to catch up with him. Back in Oklahoma City, local and federal investigators were frantically combing the blast site. In the rubble, they discovered a valuable clue. A rear axle from the Ryder truck used in the explosion, with a vehicle identification number still visible. This number led them to the rental agency in Junction City, Kansas, which had rented the truck to a man using the alias Robert Kling. With the help of a sketch from the agency, FBI agents quickly made their way to a motel in Junction City, where logs showed McVeigh's name and the same Michigan address he'd given Trooper Hanger. Investigators soon discovered that this McVeigh wasn't out on the street. He was in custody at the Noble County Jail, picked up after a routine traffic stop just hours after the bombing. Law enforcement raced to Perry, Oklahoma. In what the news called the Perp Walk, crowds gathered outside as McVeigh, shackled, stone-faced, wearing a jumpsuit, was escorted by authorities, enduring angry shouts from onlookers who already suspected his guilt. A search of his personal belongings revealed one final, chilling piece of evidence: a business card from a military surplus store. On the back, in McVeigh's handwriting, was a note: "Will need more TNT, $10 a stick." It was both literal and symbolic, a final reminder of how methodically he'd planned destruction. Here's what's chilling. McVeigh had prepared for almost everything, except the small things, the details. It's a reminder that no matter how carefully someone plans evil, they're still human. They still make mistakes. McVeigh faced an overwhelming array of charges: 160 state offenses and 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction by explosive, and 8 counts of first-degree murder for the federal officers killed in the blast. Due to intense pretrial publicity across Oklahoma, the trial was moved to Denver, Colorado, where District Judge Richard Match would preside. Jury selection began on March 31, 1997, and the trial officially commenced on April 24th. For weeks, prosecutors presented damning evidence. Phone records tracing McVeigh's calls to acquire bomb materials, testimony from his friends Michael Fortier and Terry Nichols about his explicit plans, and forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. 38 victim impact witnesses took the stand, recounting the horror of that day and the gaping wounds left in their lives. Throughout it all, McVeigh sat expressionless. No tears, no visible guilt. He rarely looked at the grieving families testifying against him. Where others might have broken under the emotional weight, McVeigh remained stoic, almost proud. He believed he was justified, that the bombing was a legitimate act of war against a tyrannical government. To him, the victims were collateral damage, a phrase he'd later use without hesitation. On June 2, 1997, after 23 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all 11 federal counts. 11 days later, on June 13th, the same jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. Judge Match formally sentenced McVeigh to death on August 14, 1997, declaring that McVeigh would be executed on each count of the indictment. The contrast between McVeigh and his accomplices was stark. Terry Nichols, tried separately, displayed visible remorse during his proceedings. He cried, appeared ashamed, and seemed genuinely disturbed by the magnitude of what had been done. The jury convicted him of conspiracy and involuntary manslaughter, but couldn't agree on the death penalty, resulting in a life sentence without parole. Michael Fortier, who had advanced knowledge of the plot but cooperated fully with investigators, received 12 years in prison. The difference between McVeigh and his accomplices? Remorse. Nichols cried, he looked ashamed. Fortier cooperated, but McVeigh? He believed he was a hero. That's the difference between someone who makes a terrible mistake and someone who's truly dangerous: the inability to see their own humanity reflected in others. Justice was served, but it didn't bring those 168 people back. It didn't heal the families. So I have to ask, do you think the death penalty brings closure? Or does it just create more pain? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't already, please like this video. It genuinely helps. After sentencing, McVeigh was transferred to the federal Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, a fortress-like prison designed to hold the nation's most dangerous criminals. There, he was housed on a special cell block that the guards quietly nicknamed Bomber's Row, sharing space with 3 other infamous mass murderers: Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber who'd terrorized the country with mail bombs; Ramzi Youssef, mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing; and Luis Felipe, a brutal gang leader who ordered murders from behind bars. Over time, McVeigh grew oddly comfortable with his notorious neighbors. They became what he called his celebrity inmates, bonding over shared infamy and mutual isolation from the outside world. For McVeigh, this was less punishment and more confirmation that he'd earned his place in history. But unlike most death row prisoners who cling desperately to life, filing appeal after appeal in hopes of delaying execution, McVeigh took a different approach. In December 2000, he shocked his attorneys by voluntarily dropping his remaining appeals. In an affidavit filed with Judge Match, McVeigh wrote, "I do not wish to pursue any appeals," adding that he made this decision against the advice of his legal team. He requested execution within 120 days, stating he would rather die than spend the rest of his life in prison. The Bureau of Prisons set his execution date for May 16, 2001. McVeigh was transferred from Colorado to the federal death row facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, to await his final day. Then, just days before the scheduled execution, a scandal erupted. The FBI disclosed that it had failed to turn over thousands of pages of documents to McVeigh's defense team during the original trial, evidence that should have been provided under discovery rules. Attorney General John Ashcroft postponed the execution to June 11, 2001, to allow time for the documents to be reviewed. McVeigh was furious at the delay, viewing it as prolonging the inevitable. Most death row inmates fight for every second of life. McVeigh, he wanted to die. He saw himself as a martyr, a soldier who'd completed his mission. It's a chilling reminder that some people don't fear consequences. They embrace them. The Bureau of Prisons gave it a code name, Operation Elm Tree. By the early morning hours of June 10, 2001, the plan was already in motion. At 4:25 a.m., guards escorted McVeigh from his death row cell to a specially prepared holding area adjacent to the execution chamber. This would be his final home, a stark, stripped-down room where condemned prisoners spend their last hours. An hour later, at 5:25 a.m., McVeigh was permitted to shower, but the water came out ice cold and he couldn't resist a dark joke. "This is cruel and unusual punishment," he quipped to the guard standing nearby. Even facing death, McVeigh maintained his strange composure, his ability to detach, to mock, to refuse any sign of vulnerability. Throughout the day, McVeigh spent most of his time sleeping or watching television. Guards documented him flipping through channels, pausing on CNN to watch coverage of his own impending execution. At times, he smiled, even laughed softly, at programs on screen. To those observing him, it felt surreal, almost inhuman. Here was a man hours away from death, behaving as though he were simply killing time on a lazy Sunday afternoon. At 3:00 a.m. on June 11th, McVeigh woke from another nap and turned the television back on. 4 hours left. Outside the prison walls, the world was watching. Survivors, families of victims, protesters on both sides of the death penalty debate. Inside, McVeigh remained eerily calm. At 4:29 a.m., his attorneys Rob Nye and Nathan Chambers arrived for their final visit. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. When they left, there were no emotional farewells, no tearful goodbyes, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was the end. At 6:07 a.m., McVeigh turned on the television one last time. 2 minutes later, at 6:09 a.m., guards entered to conduct a strip search, and a deputy coroner examined him to check for signs of abuse, standard protocol for all executions. At 6:13 a.m., he was handed fresh clothing, new underwear, socks, khaki pants, and a white T-shirt. He signed a waiver refusing an autopsy. At 6:18 a.m., guards placed him in restraints. A prison chaplain entered shortly after to administer last rites, a Catholic ritual McVeigh accepted despite his wavering faith. When asked about his final meal, McVeigh kept it simple. 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. No elaborate feast. No symbolic gesture. Just ice cream, cold, sweet, uncomplicated. At 7:14 a.m. Central Time, 8:14 a.m. Eastern, Timothy McVeigh was led into the execution chamber at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was 33 years old. This marked the first federal execution in the United States since 1963, 38 years without a single person put to death by the federal government. McVeigh was strapped to a gurney, IVs inserted into his right leg. He declined to make a verbal final statement, but prison officials distributed a handwritten note he'd prepared, a copy of the 1875 poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. The final lines read, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." As the curtain opened, McVeigh made deliberate eye contact with the people gathered to witness his death. First his supporters, then the media, and finally the survivors and victims' families seated in a separate room. His eyes remained open. His expression stayed blank, defiant, composed. Witnesses described him as looking totally expressionless, with a look of defiance, as if he could do it all over again. 3 chemicals flowed through the IV line: sodium thiopental to render him unconscious, pancuronium to stop his breathing, and potassium chloride to stop his heart. The process was clinical, sterile, painless. At 8:14 a.m. Eastern Time, prison officials declared Timothy McVeigh dead. His execution was broadcast via closed-circuit television to more than 200 survivors and family members gathered at a viewing site in Oklahoma City. An unprecedented 242 total witnesses watched him die. Meanwhile, outside the Terre Haute prison, only about 140 protesters had gathered, far fewer than anticipated. Some sang hymns, others held signs reading, "Remember the Victims." In Oklahoma City, a group held a silent vigil at the bombing memorial, 168 minutes of silence, one for each life lost. McVeigh died as he lived in his final years, unrepentant, defiant, convinced to the bitter end that he had been justified. The attack on the Alfred P. Murrah building left an extraordinary mark on America, and on every person touched by its devastation. In the aftermath, families gathered at memorials, holding photos of children, mothers, fathers, and colleagues who would never come home. For some, McVeigh's execution brought a sense of peace, a belief that justice had been finally served. Yet, many found the pain only deepened. No legal sentence, no note or apology could fill the void left behind. Survivors like P.J. Allen still bear the physical and emotional scars decades later. Some victims' families coped by finding purpose, raising awareness, helping others, or simply reuniting in shared grief. But others continue struggling with heavy emotions: sorrow, depression, anger, and even guilt for having survived when so many others didn't. The journey toward healing is complex and personal. Closure, for many, remains elusive. The Oklahoma City bombing awakened the nation to the dangers of extremist ideology and the profound cost of unchecked anger and dehumanization. McVeigh's radicalization didn't happen in an instant. It was a gradual process. Years spent consuming violent rhetoric, seeking out voices that echoed his resentments, and withdrawing from any view that challenged his beliefs. Warning signs were visible, though perhaps not fully understood. Isolation, obsession, a growing inability to empathize, all quietly transformed him from a disillusioned citizen into a domestic terrorist. This progression offers a sobering lesson, not only for law enforcement and policymakers, but for all of us. Radicalization can begin in the smallest moments: an unaddressed grievance, a toxic community, a decision to tune out empathy. It grows when fears and frustrations are amplified, not questioned. How do we prevent someone else from following the same dark path? It starts with awareness, recognizing when anger is becoming isolation, checking ourselves before our grievances morph into hatred for others, encouraging open dialogue, practicing empathy, even when it's difficult. Seeking diverse perspectives and challenging the urge to retreat into echo chambers. Addressing conflicts, disappointments, or even perceived injustices must be done through peaceful, democratic means. History shows us that when grievances go unheard and communities become divided, anger festers and dangers mount. McVeigh's story is more than the account of a single horrifying act. It's a cautionary tale of how easily disconnection and rage can metastasize if left unchecked. McVeigh didn't wake up one day and decide to kill 168 people. It was a process. Years of consuming extreme content, surrounding himself with people who reinforced his views, and slowly losing his ability to see the humanity in others. The lesson isn't only about recognizing potential terrorists. It's about spotting the warning signs in anyone who's going down a dangerous path, including ourselves. If this story affected you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think we can learn from McVeigh's transformation? How do we stop the next person from going down that road? Share your perspective in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more deep-dive true crime stories that explore not just what happened, but why and what we can learn, subscribe to True Crime Diaries. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. And remember, understanding evil doesn't mean excusing it. It means making sure it never happens again.